Good day, everyone watching. So, basically, since the past week, I've been studying the book of Genesis. I felt like I've been led to really analyze, especially the story of Noah and the flood. And basically, I'm just going to share the points that I've taken down concerning the issue with the giants of that time and the entire myths, concepts, and even assumptions based on how this phenomena actually occurred. So that's what I'm about to do. So in Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 to 13, I'm reading off what I wrote down earlier. So the passage starts off by a clear statement that also shows the spiritual distinction between the sons of God and daughters of men. For man was not born of himself, but through the divine power of God. Therefore, all men hold the title as sons of God. Men being out of man, or coming from the man through the divine intellect of God, it must be understood here why women hold the title of as daughters of men, since observing the method of creation for both. So basically what I was saying here is that the sons of God in this context that Genesis, which Moses was speaking of when he wrote down the book of Genesis, in this context he was speaking of the righteous, pious men which became perverted and became wicked in those times. Those were the sons of God, not demons, not fallen angels that most people likely presume to think. And I'm going to explain further why. So remember now, this is what I'm saying. Sons of God. Man was not born of himself or born from a woman. Speaking of the first man. The first man came directly from God. And then woman was actually birthed from man. That's why in the continuing sentence, or in the continuing verse, it talks about the daughters of men, because Adam would actually be the father of all daughters. You understand that point? So you have to look at it from that spiritual sense. So in Genesis chapter 6 verse 3, the first biological limitation of the flood appears as if the all-powerful Most High made the first genetically biological limitation during this time in order to inhibit the common living organisms from developing to such a terrifying scale ever again, which related to age expectancy or a certain duration in the age span. So basically, when you read verse 3 in Genesis chapter 6 concerning Noah's flood, you will realize God made a statement saying that his spirit can no longer strive with men. But as of this time, their lifespan will be 120 years. I'm paraphrasing. So what really happened, automatically in the spirit, God made a biological or a physiological limitation based on certain based on that age that we normally hope to reach, or that we can no longer reach, like our predecessors, like Adam's generation. He made that limitation because I'm going to continue and explain why now. So in Genesis chapter 6 verses 4 to 5, This explains two legitimate causes that contributed to the problem of the giants, basically the Nephilim, the Anakim, whatever you want to call them. Because in Genesis chapter 6, the Bible basically described that these sons of God they came upon the daughters of men, and they breeded mighty men, old and of renown. These mighty men are interpreted to be the giants, obviously, that were known to cause chaos and violence, and were very strong and brutal during those times. So what I wrote down is that the causes of this problem, two causes mainly, were age proliferation and sin. And I will correlate this with Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 to 19. So, now from the lineage of Adam and Eve, guys, what you have to understand, Canaan, Seth, and every man in that generation, except for Enoch, which was 365 years, was above 600 years. So getting technical now, the reason why that generation lived so long was because sin had not yet contaminated any living organism or geological matter. So the quality of the earth, the same ground that God used to form every physical land animal, mammal, which we are mammals according to science, that quality of earth was very rich, moist, and incredibly fertile. It was in the most pristine quality that could ever be imagined. So durable, fit for the expansion of the next generation to come. So with the supernatural manifestation from God manipulating all these elements together into man, which is man and woman basically, that entire generation of Adam would obviously live exceedingly longer than any other generation after, due to the fact that they were equipped already with the essentials to blossom forth an abundant people. Notice the Bible uses words, but because what I'm saying to guys, if you kind of want to understand what I'm saying even more clearly, based on the wonders probably and the questions of how could these people still live to that age, think about a tree, right? You know, it starts from the roots and then blossoms forth into branches, limbs, then to branches, then to flowers, then to buds, petal. It just continues, it blossoms basically. But you have to understand that during that whole process of growth, during that whole time, the roots of that tree still remain, and they are the oldest, they are the strongest, and the first parts of the tree that are going to start to wither, are going to begin to actually deteriorate, are the outskirts of the tree, because they are farther away from the essence of what made the tree, which was in the root, that blessing that God placed inside of Adam and Eve. As our generation, you have to compare this tree with the Adam's generation, which is our generation, and that essence that I'm speaking of, this in the tree that is supplanted in the root, was the seed that God blessed that generation with, the generation of Adam and Eve. So, in the sense of perceiving it from an aspect of a plant and the natural process of photosynthesis and how a plant grows, how a tree grows and grows and grows abundantly. But you have to understand, it starts from that seed being supplanted. And that initial moment, that plant is most fertile and durable. But the more and more it grows, it becomes less fertile and durable. And that seed, in comparison, that we humans have, that men have especially, the reproductive cells. So remember, because sin did not yet come into its presence, into this world, it did not poison us to the core, especially Adam's generation. So his reproductive cell, the sperm, because it was just supplanted in him by the Most High. Remember, he was already equipped to bring forth an abundant people, which would eventually be destroyed and then reestablished. But it was still his strength, understand? That so God just created him. The essence is in the seed. Stray further and further away from the light of God that causes us to blossom, that causes us to grow abundantly. That's why we can't see age figures like that anymore. So the Bible even uses words familiar with agriculture to describe this process when he commands man to be fruitful and multiply. Come on, guys, you have to see it. That's in Genesis chapter 1 verses 28. Now, in explaining the abnormal size of growth of the generation of Noah, this was as a result of the wickedness of man's heart. Whose heart? Man's heart. Who exactly were those men? The sons of God. Now, I told you that the sons of God were the blessed men that God just created, the righteous men in God's sight. But because of sin perverted the beauty of God's creation, all living things. So, basically, in a way for me to explain it, to make it seem clearer to you, this is what I want to say now. Now remember, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, God had already cursed the ground, which was spiritually Adam's coming generation of destruction. Alright, let me explain why I said this, and let me explain why actually pinned and related the ground with Adam's generation to proceed. You have to understand that from the earth came man. That means we are from the earth and we are dirt. So if in Genesis chapter 3 verse 17 God cursed the ground for Adam's sake, you have to understand that every living thing, every living substance that was created from the earth during that time would suffer sin, especially in this case, in this context, every person from Adam's generation would be at a disadvantage to this curse. And this curse, in a way, God perverted that preservation and maintenance of their physiological aspects, meaning the fact that they could grow and age, they could see many years and not wear away. It was perverted, and that reserve, that those nutrients, that divine power that Adam's generation was bestowed with, became corrupted, and in the spirit, it caused a kind of let me read on the next page. It caused an abnormal and exponential growth in body mass and the height of that generation of Noah that God was talking about when he cursed the ground for Adam's sake. It was for Adam why the ground had to be cursed. Because of sin. Because of their sin. Now something so beautiful and something so necessary became almost self-destructive in a way. So now, with such burst of AGH, because human growth hormone is the essential component and ingredient for growth in human beings. So this was basically skyrocketed that caused them to grow to such lengths or such degrees. And there is actually scientific studies and records that prove that if this human growth hormone is actually out of balance, as in a hormone is released too much, it can actually compromise the brain. So that would actually explain why those people of that time, these giants, were so, in a way, ignorant or very violent, aggressive. They could not understand things well. They could not reason. Basically stupid. They were neurologically deficient. So because of man's disobedience and this disaster, God had to reset his creation. So additionally, from that time onward, you have to understand that man's age has been reduced and has been adjusted 2 times in the spirit by God. First, it was this was done in Genesis when God said his spirit shall not always strive with man, for his days shall be 120 years. Before that, you have to understand, because sin did not yet enter the picture, man's years were limitless. We could not put a figure or a prediction on when man would die. So it happened here, and in Psalms 90 verses 10, he did it again when David said that, paraphrasing, that man would live up to 70 years and by reason of strength 80. So that's basically it still. That's all that I wrote down concerning the story of Noah and why, and the consequences of disobedience, and how it led to kind of a physiological and a biological phenomena known as the giants. Because you have to understand, it's not talking about demons. Because if it were demons, first of all, demons cannot impregnate. Fallen angels, no angels at all, has the ability to procreate. That's the first thing. And secondly, why isn't that happening still? That's why the flood was essential, to eradicate that generation that was blessed with that blessing of abundant years that man was unappreciative of by their continuous rebellion against God. So he had to eradicate that generation and reset it